tonight. My name is Adrian Palomecchia. I'm a Community Involvement Coordinator for U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. If you've never been here, I know there are some restrooms on the back, all the way on the left side. The main reason, of course, this evening that we're here is to provide some public comments on the two interim cleanup options that we have for the East Troy contaminated aquifer. Thank you for being here on time. We have a very good audience here, a number of people, so thank you for doing that. I have with me Sherry Kolek, who is the remedial project manager for the site, and we'll be providing hopefully everybody got an agenda. If not, please feel free to grab one in the back. So we have 4 sections. We'll go to that in a minute. And we'll also have some fact sheets with summarizing the plan as well. So I would recommend you have one to grab one as well. In that fact sheet, you'll see a page for public comments. Feel free to fill in some comments if you like. You can do that right now, or you can do it. You can bring it to us later. So with that, I'd just like to introduce a few people that are here with us tonight.
I got it.
But before that, I do want to thank the City of Troy for allowing us to use this wonderful facility here. Can you hear me over there not very well? I'm going to use a microphone. Let me see. I'm sure. Hello, is this a little better? Yeah, now it's a little better. Okay, I wanted to thank the City of Troy for allowing us to use this wonderful facility here at the Council City's Chambers. We have a few important people here, so thank you for coming and hearing this. We have the mayor, of course. Thank you, mayor, for being here. We have also some mayors from some members from the city council, I believe. Thank you for being here as well. And of course, we have a lot of people from the general public. And with that, I also wanted to introduce a couple of people that have helped with the project as well. We have Guy Munford, who's an EPA technical contractor and also has been in the project for a long time. We also have Eric Morton, who's also a EPA technical contractor. Both of them have been helping with the project for a long time, so they have a lot of wealth of information. And if needed, we'll talk to them during the brief question and answer section that we have after our presentation. And we also have Madeline Adams here, who's the Ohio EPA coordinator for the site. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I just want to show the agenda. You should have a copy of that in front of you. Like I was mentioning, we'll start with this brief introduction that we're doing right now. We'll follow up to a proposed cleanup presentation given by Ms. Sherry Kolek. Then we'll have some brief question and answer section regarding the presentation, and then we'll move to the main part of the meeting, which is the public comments and oral comments section, which will be recorded by the stenographer. So every public comment that's made will be recorded and acknowledged properly, and will be part of a responsiveness summary that will be available to the public either later in the summer or early in the fall. It will be available for everyone to look at. And then we'll just have a conclusion wrap up. So that's the order of items that we have. You can provide, like I was mentioning earlier, your comments on those sheets. You can also provide your comments online. We have a website, the East Troy Contaminated Aquifer website, that you can log in and you can put in your comments that way. You can email them to me directly. My emails and those fact sheets that you see floating around. And so you have different ways how you can provide your comments. And we just started the public comment period on June 25th, so this past Monday. And we'll have a 30-day comment period until July 25th. So you can provide your comments all the way until July 25th. So with that, I would like to have Ms. Sherry Kolek provide the presentation about the plan, the interim plan cleanup. This plan is going to be a plan to address those 2 sources of groundwater contamination while we're developing a long-term plan to deal with the contamination. So, Sherry, please.
Thank you, Adrian. And just to reiterate, thank you so much for coming out. I'm really happy to see a lot of people here. So, okay, for tonight's the presentation I'll be giving, we're just going to touch briefly on the site description, the nature and extent of the contamination, the risk to public health from the contamination, our overall interim cleanup approach, some of the alternatives that we considered to clean up the contamination, and then EPA's preferred alternative. which is what we're looking for comments from everybody from. Okay. Do you want to shut this light a little so you can see?
Yeah, I'll do that. That's it.
That's it? Okay.
Thank you very much.
The site that we investigated through soil and groundwater sampling is shown in this, whoa, hold on a second, is shown in this yellow boxed area. It's about a 20 square block area. Across, and that's the site that we investigated, East Troy. Across the river here is East Troy's, City of Troy's East well field, where they have 5 production wells that serve everybody in the City of Troy limits water. Previous investigations that were done on the site by the state and us too found volatile organic compounds, and VOCs for short are those compounds that readily evaporate into the air. So we found VOCs in groundwater, soil, and also in the indoor air of some homes in the area. The site consists of 2 groundwater plumes. This is a residential plume, and it's mainly in the residential area between Walnut and Floral Streets. This plume contains mainly perchloroethylene, or PCE for short, and that's usually what dry cleaners use as a solvent to clean their clothes. And the source of that groundwater plume, this groundwater plume, it was a former dry cleaner. It was the Troy 1 Hour Martinizing cleaners that operated there along Walnut Street, just off of Main. And they were discharging, what we think is they're discharging PCE contaminated wastewater into their drains or into the sanitary sewer, and then over time there was some cracks in the sewer, and then released PCE into the groundwater. Sorry about this, I don't do that. The second groundwater plume is the East Water Street plume here, and it's located mainly along East Water Street, and this plume is mainly trichloroethylene, or TCE, and the source of this groundwater plume was a former Hobart Cabinet Company facility. They used perchloroethylene and trichloroethylene to degrease metal parts, and our groundwater and soil data indicates that there must have been some direct dumping on the ground or spills on the ground, and the contaminants made its way through the groundwater, and that's where we got the East Water Street plume. The site was first discovered back in 1988 when cis-1,2-dichloroethylene was discovered in a couple of the production wells. They were very low levels, well below the Safe Drinking Water Act MCL. The MCL is 5. But after that prompted investigation by the state of Ohio. And in 2006, Ohio's sub-slab vapor sampling that they did underneath people's homes and buildings, that confirmed that these VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, are moving up and getting into the indoor air. So they called us, a different program, our removal program, and our removal folks came out here and did a site assessment where they collected just abundant soil, groundwater they collected sub-slab vapor samples, and they also sampled inside the indoor air inside people's homes. And then as a result of that sampling, there were 16 homes and 1 school, St. Patrick's School, that received sub-slab depressurization systems, which is similar to the radon mitigation system. In 2008, the site was listed on the national priorities list, so it became the Superfund site, but it also became eligible then, because it's a Superfund site, eligible for federal funds to clean it up. In 2010, we started our investigation, collecting soil, groundwater samples. We completed it, did several phases. We completed it in 2014, and in 2015, we finalized the remedial investigation report. And that report gives you, it gives the sampling data from all of the sampling that we did. This is in the Troy Public Library as well for you to look at and view. And then in 2016, we were looking at different cleanup options of how to address the soil and groundwater contamination. And then in 2017, we developed another report called the Focus Feasibility Study Report. And that report focuses on really 3 areas. There's a couple of areas, 3 areas that are sources of contaminants to the groundwater. So they keep releasing contaminants, PCE or TCE, to the groundwater over time. So we're going to attack those through this proposed plan, try to clean those up first, and then come back later, see how the groundwater is doing, and then come back later if we need to implement another groundwater remedy. Okay, that's the sampling that we did. We collected over 200 soil samples, about 400 groundwater samples. We also sampled the sediment and surface water in the Great Miami River. Did a sewer camera survey along Walnut Street, and then we did some vapor intrusion testings. And then our last part of investigation, we really focused on those main source areas, to try to find out how extensive it was, how bad is the contamination, where is it going. So we wanted to know that because we wanted to target for cleanup. For our soil sampling, we sampled 4 areas. We sampled in the residential area. We sampled at Hobart Cabinets, Spinnaker Coatings, and then we sampled the backyard of some of the homes. I think there's 4 homes between Hobart and Spinnaker, so we sampled in that area as well. Okay, this is the soil samples that we did. You're not supposed to see the results, but the yellow areas are the areas that we sampled as far as a residential area. And everything that we found, all the results were below these screening levels. These are screening levels that EPA uses. They're levels that are considered protective for public health over a lifetime. So they're very conservative, risk-based levels that we screen against. So everything was below our screening levels. Along East Water Street, we sampled the soil, and the highest contamination that we found was behind the Hobart loading dock here. We found PCE in a concentration of 89,000 parts per billion in the soil. And then we found trichloroethylene, or TCE, at 72,000 parts per billion in the soil. So to just give you an idea, TCE, the screening level that's considered protective for industrial use is 1,900 parts per billion, and we found TCE at 89,000 parts per billion. So it's pretty high concentrations. Over at Spinnaker, we found some area that had some elevated results. There's one area in particular here. This is the western portion of their Spinnaker parking lot. It's just a narrow portion of it, but we found trichloroethylene at a concentration of 22,000 parts per billion. Parts per billion. Okay, so a part per billion is like 1 ink drop in a large fuel tanker truck. So it's really small. Or you could say it's 1 second in 32 years. Very small, but still. The area between Hobart and Spinnaker, we did sample. We blocked it out for protect people's privacy, but we didn't find anything there. Everything was below our residential screening levels. Okay, so some of our general observations when we did the groundwater sampling, the residential area, where the dry cleaner was, we call the residential area plume source area. That's where the bulk of these PCE or perchloroethylene soils are located, and they're, subsurface. But that's the area that we wanted to target. So we did find really high concentrations of PCE, perchloroethylene, in the subsurface. I'll go over the concentrations in a minute. But we did find as well lower levels of PCE at a depth of 85 feet below ground surface. And then as you move down gradient, the dry cleaner is at Walnut, like in Maine, and if you start moving down gradient toward Floral, the concentrations start to drop off, and you see the contamination primarily in the shallow part of the aquifer. And then at East Water Street, that plume, it's mainly the shallow portion of the aquifer that's contaminated. The shallow portion of the aquifer is like between 20 and 40 feet. Then there's a middle portion between 40 and 60 feet, and then the deeper portion, which is 60 to 200 feet. And that's the portion that the city draws their drinking water from. which is clean. Okay, the residential plume is primarily PCE with lesser amounts of TCE and cis 1,2 DCE. And the East Water Street plume is the opposite. So it has more TCE, trichloroethylene, than perchloroethylene. Okay. All right, so this is just showing the general concentrations, like as you move toward floral, but right here where the dry cleaner is along Walnuts, if you go between Walnut and Clay Street, you have concentrations in groundwater of PCE as high as 3,500 parts per billion. The MCL, the drinking water standard, is 5, so it's pretty elevated. But if you go from Walnut to Clay, it starts like at 3,500 parts per billion. It drops down to 800 parts per billion around Clay, and then from Clay to Union, it's generally between 800 parts per billion and 500 parts per billion. From Union to Counts, it goes from 500 down to 100 parts per billion. And then from Counts to Moorhead, it really starts dropping off. It's under 100, but by the time you get to Floral, we don't find anything in the groundwater. And again, the MCL, the drinking water standard, is 5. So. Okay, so this is the dry cleaner. This is the area that we're going to target for cleanup. This is called the residential area, residential plume source area. The dry cleaner, I think, used to operate here at 10 East Main, but it appears that they have used like the back parts of these two buildings, 8 South Walnut, 10 South Walnut. And again, you know, they were discharging their processed wastewater with PCE into the sewers. And there was some breach, I guess, along the line here that ended up with the contamination here at depth. But we're finding PCE at, let's see, 34 feet at 2,700 parts per billion, at 39 feet at 2,400 parts per billion, and then the highest that we found was 3,500 parts per billion at 44-foot depth. So this area in red is really where the highest concentration of PCE is located. This area contains the bulk and the mass of the PCE, perchloroethylene, in the groundwater. And this is, it kind of like acts as a sponge. And it just, as the groundwater moves through, it keeps releasing these PCE into the groundwater over time. And without addressing the sponge area and cleaning that up, you'll still have PCE moving through the groundwater. So that's why we're going to address this area. Groundwater results around East Water Street plume. Around Hobart, we did some groundwater sampling. When we found PCE and TCE in the groundwater, but it was under 20, still above the MCL of 5. We did some vapor intrusion sampling. We sampled homes. Hard to see, but we sampled homes in the phase 1. We sampled them once. We sampled in phase 2, we sampled some additional homes. All right, let me back up. The phase 1 are shown in green, are the green areas. It's phase 1. Phase 2 was the orange areas. And then the yellow houses are the ones we sampled twice during our phase 2 vapor intrusion sampling. So we sent out 100 letters to people, and mainly it was really targeting those areas that were over the highest concentration of the plume. You know, we sent out several times trying to get access to sample their homes. We had, I don't know, maybe 30 responses, but 25 of them, homeowners, let us sample in their homes. So we really didn't get a lot of turnout, but just one thing to note, you know, when the removal people were here, they sent out 400 letters. So everybody in this whole area around the site and just outside the site have been notified once or have been asked by EPA if they'd like their homes tested. Okay, site risks. You know, I was talking about the screening levels. Anything that's above these screening levels, we pull into this method. It's called the Human Health Risk Assessment. And the risk assessment tells you whether or not there's health risks associated with exposure to either contaminated soils or the groundwater. So I'll show you the risks now that well, before I do that, the soil along East Water Street, we had to divide them up into exposure areas. We had 6 exposure areas, but EA1 right here is behind the Hobart loading dock where that really high TC and PC soils are located. That's the area we're going to target under this cleanup. EA2 really didn't find anything as far as risk. Let me just pop you over to EA6. That's a narrow portion of Spinnaker parking lot, and that's one of the other areas we're targeting for cleanup. But here is what the risk assessment said. It says for the EA1 soils, there is an unacceptable health risk if future residents or future industrial commercial workers were exposed to the EA1 soils. And the way they would be exposed to EA1 soils, because it's in the subsurface, is if that soil at depth is excavated and brought to the surface. The TCE and PCE would volatilize. They would release from the soil, and the residents would, breathe it in, or the commercial workers would breathe it in. And that's the way that they're being exposed. And if they are exposed that way, then that would be an unacceptable health risk. Also to EA1 soils, the current and future construction workers. So if there was a construction worker who went into the EA1 area and dug a construction trench, the vapors that could be released from the contaminated soils, if they breathed it in, that would cause an unacceptable health risk as well. EA6 soils, that's the portion that's at the Spinnaker parking lots. Future residents, the site is currently industrial, commercial, so nobody's living there, but a part of our risk assessment, we look at future reuses of the land as well. So if Spinnaker was converted into residential use and they were exposed to the EA6 soils, future residents would be exposed to those soils, and unacceptable health risk would result. And the way they would also be exposed is if those soils at the subsurface were brought to the surface during excavation or landscaping, and the vapors, people breathe in, that would cause the unacceptable health risk. Okay, let's see. Okay, groundwater. For the groundwater, there would be unacceptable health risks to future residents. One thing I'll point out, the current residents, everybody living in this area is connected to city water. There's no health risk associated with that. But if a future resident was using the groundwater, the contaminated groundwater that's currently now underground, there would be an unacceptable health risk by them drinking it, by them having contact with it during showering or washing dishes, breathing in the vapors. Also, there would be unacceptable health risks to those the current and future industrial commercial workers, and they would be exposed, in the workplace if you're washing dishes, the vapors from the contaminated water that they're washing dishes with, it would vaporize, and they would breathe it in, and that's how the health risk would be obtained. And then again, current and future construction worker and utility worker, if they dug a trench in the area of the groundwater, they would be exposed as well and be unacceptable health risks associated with that. Okay, so for vapor intrusion, we did pull in the results that we got from the people's homes. We did the risk assessment portion. The risk assessment portion said that current and future residents, there's an unacceptable health risk to current and future residents living in the area due to vapor intrusion, okay? But I just want to point out that vapor intrusion is, you have the contaminated groundwater, and this water is, vaporizing, it's evaporating, it's moving up through the soil, and it's getting into your houses only if there's cracks in the foundation. If there's no cracks in the foundation, you're not going to find it in the indoor air. But if there are, you could find it in the indoor air. But the second part of that is that we did sample. We went out and sampled the people's homes and the indoor air. All of the concentrations we found in the homes that we sampled were all above a screening level. So there was nothing in the indoor air of the homes we sampled that presented a health risk. Yeah, thank you. But one thing I do want to point out is that even though we didn't find it in the indoor air, people who live above these groundwater plumes, there's the vapor underneath their houses, they're very high, depending where you are. The closer to the dry cleaner you are, Okay. So the subslab vapor samples that we collected show that it's pretty high concentrations underneath your building foundation, but it's just not getting in the indoor air because there's no cracks or anything in there. So just pointing that out because before EPA could only install or offer subslab depressurization systems or these radon mitigation systems only if the indoor air presents an unacceptable health risk. But now we have new guidance that allows us to what we call preemptively mitigate the potential for vapor intrusion occurring. So if you have high subslab, nothing in the indoor air, we can still offer you a subslab vapor depressurization system just because there is a potential, if a crack develops, that you could be exposed. Also did some sediment and surface water sampling in the Great Miami River. There was no risks to any of the aquatic receptors in the river and the terrestrial habitat. We didn't find the terrestrial habitat that could be at risk. I guess there were some areas that have astroturf between the river and wherever they took it, but no terrestrial risks, no risk to animals occupying the land near the river or the fish in the river. Okay. So our approach for the cleanup is, Our approach is to address those three areas, those sources of contamination to the groundwater, and that's EA1, right here, Hobart loading dock area of the soils. We want to clean up. We want to clean up the EA6 soils, and then that residential area plume, that source area that you saw the red, mass there. We want to clean that up too because those continue to act as sources of groundwater contamination. Okay, so this is our cleanup objectives. Essentially for the East Water Street soils, we want to prevent exposure to the trichloroethylene, people being exposed to TCE in the soil. So that's our objective. Our objective at EA6 is the same thing. We want to prevent people from being exposed to the contaminated soils. We also want to minimize, since perchloroethane and trichloroethane, TCE and PCE are in the soils, they can leach out into the groundwater. Sometimes there's periods of high, rain, and the groundwater will move up, and it could be in contact with the contaminated soils, and then the PCE will release out into the groundwater. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We want to minimize that. And then our cleanup goals for the soil are, the 34 parts per billion and the 44 parts per billion. And for the groundwater, our goal is not to reach MCLs. It's not to get to safe drinking water levels because the concentrations there are really, really high. So our goal is to knock down that mass of PCE that's out there by the dry cleaner. We want to reduce the mass by 70 to 90%, not only in the dry cleaner, but we also want to achieve that same goal between Walnut and Union. In vapor intrusion, we want to mitigate the potential for any vapor intrusion to get into people's homes. Okay, so here are the cleanup alternatives that we evaluated. Soil alternative number 1 is a no action, and we have to do that under Superfund law. The second one, soil alternative 2, is excavation with offsite disposal. So under that, about 9,100 cubic yards of contaminated soil would be removed from the Hobart loading dock area. At Spinnaker, I think it's 753 cubic yards would be removed from that area. It'd be loaded onto a dump truck and then transported to a licensed landfill facility. The excavation area that's open would be backfilled with clean material. So that's that alternative, alternative 2, S2. Alternative S3 is a combination of both. It's excavation at EA1, the Hobart loading dock area, and capping the EA6 on Spinnaker property. The EA6, the soils that are contaminated, are currently under an asphalt parking lot. But that asphalt parking lot is not constructed in accordance with Ohio EPA guidance for asphalt caps. So what we would do under this alternative is dig up 14 inches of contaminated soil and the 2 inches of asphalt that's currently there. We'd send it off-site, backfill with clean material, and then put 6 inches of asphalt. And that complies with the state of Ohio guidance, requirements for asphalt caps. So those are the 2 soil alternatives that we looked at. Okay, so for groundwater in that residential plume source area, we evaluated no action, and then also we evaluated in situ groundwater treatment. We looked at ways to really aggressively treat the source area to knock down those concentrations, because eventually we want to get to MCL. We want to have clean groundwater, for people. So the groundwater alternatives, oh no. Oh, sorry guys, what happened?
And go back forward.
Yeah, how do you get that out?
Don't worry, just think about
Go back this way.
We don't know how to do it either, so it's okay.
Thank you. Not the only one. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but how do you get it blown up? Oh, I know.
That may be.
I bet that's air, right? Of course. Okay, there you go. Hey, okay. Okay, so the 3 treatment technologies that we evaluated to address the source area, the first one it's called RGW2A. RGW just stands for residential groundwater. But 2A is in situ treatment. That means treatment in the ground with this process called enhanced reductive dechlorination. And what that does is it adds reductive agents to the groundwater underground, and that reacts with the PCE soils, and it breaks it down into less toxic forms. The second one is the same thing in situ, but it's using ISCAR, in situ chemical oxidation. So this one, chemical, not oxidation, I'm sorry, I was on 2C. In situ chemical reduction. So the chemicals would reduce the PCE down to its less toxic forms. So we all do the same thing as far as breaking that PCE down. ISCO is the last one, that's 2C, that's in situ chemical oxidation, and that's adding chemicals to the groundwater to, again, break the PCE down. Okay, so there's similarities between these different treatment alternatives, and there's differences. So this slide points out the similarities. The similarities being that all of these in situ treatment technologies would be taking place between Main Street and Union Street. So this hatched area, that's where we're envisioning doing the injections in, because that's really the most contaminated area. So they have all of those, all the treatment options have that treatment zone in common. Oh my God. Okay. The alternatives with ERD and ISCAR 2A and 2B, they're different. What this technology does, it recirculates. It uses a recirculation process where, it's hard to see here, but groundwater is extracted out at this down gradient end. It's brought up to the surface, mixed with the reagents, the treatment chemicals, either ERD treatment chemicals or ISCAR chemicals, and then it's injected back down into the groundwater again. So we're taking it out of the ground, treating it, re-injecting it, and it's kind of like this loop process, and that's what basically recirculation is. Very simplified version of really what the technology is. But those 2 alternatives use the same process. Then, this alternative, ISCO, in situ chemical oxidation, does not do that. This technology takes clean groundwater that we would get from a well outside the groundwater plume, and it would mix the chemicals, the ISCO chemicals with it, and then we inject it into the ground, just directly directing it into the ground. And then, there would be, there'll be injection points where it's injected this is just preliminary. This is not what it's going to really look like. It could all change, but that comes into the next stage of this. Okay. After we make a decision, we get your comments, then we make a decision on what cleanup we're going to go with. And then from there, we have to sit down and do the engineering drawings, figure out how we're going to design this system. So that's what the next stage is. The other difference or similarities between 2A and 2B is that there's this area here called Zone 1A. What we would do is we would make those chemical reagents with the water, clean groundwater. We'd inject it up gradients here, and then the remediation, the treatment amendments would flow underneath the church. The church is right here. Here's the source area. So we inject it up gradient. The groundwater flows this way. We take it out here. We extract the contaminated groundwater. And because we can't recirculate it, we can't take contaminated groundwater and re-inject it into to clean areas. So we're going to take the groundwater, treat it, and then send it to the POTW. That's what those two technologies do, whereas IFCO doesn't do that because it doesn't rely on recirculation. It's just taking clean groundwater, mixing the treatment amendments, and then injecting it into the ground. There's no extraction of groundwater or no management of that Zone 1A water that we have to do. Okay, good. The vapor intrusion alternatives, we looked at alternative 2, which was offering sub-slab depressurization systems to everybody who is in the treatment area. That's that area between Walnuts and Union Streets. Plus, we want to add in an additional 3 blocks. So we're going to offer it to people between Walnuts and Frank Streets and between East Water Street and like Canal.
It's Main Street, right?
What? Main Street? No. No, I didn't say it. This is Walnut. This is Frank. This is Main Street and Canal. Sorry, thank you. Okay. So now we came up with these alternatives to clean up the soil and groundwater. Now Superfund law makes us go through this whole evaluation where we have to evaluate these alternatives against 9 criteria. And these are the criteria. The first 2 is threshold criteria. That's overall protection of public health. The second one is compliance with ARARs. That means like compliance with state, local, and other federal laws. So any remedy that we select has to meet those 2 criteria. So all of those alternatives that we showed you meets those criteria. Just popping down here, just modifying criteria. Our remedy that we select also has to have state acceptance, which the state did say they concur with what we're recommending, which you'll see later. And then we also need community acceptance as well. And that's why we're here at this meeting, is to get people, public comments on our proposed cleanup. So we have to, we take your comments into consideration because whatever we're proposing here may change based on your comments. So that's, why you are an important part of this whole process. Then this 5 criteria in the middle is a primary balancing criteria. That's where you kind of make these trade-offs between the 2 to see which one is like the best option as far as remedy. Long-term permanence and effectiveness is really how well does the remedy hold up in the long term. Reduction of toxicity, mobility through treatment, that just means does your remedy contain treatment? Does it reduce the volume, the toxicity, or mobility of the contaminants? Short-term effectiveness is, how long will it take to construct the remedy? How long do you have to operate it before you meet your cleanup goals? And is there any dangers to the community or to workers who are handling the material? Implementability, how easy it is to implement, how easy, is the resources available to, say, construct a cap, things like that. And then costs, that takes into factor about capital costs, how much does it cost to construct the remedy? Do you have to continue monitoring it over long term? That's an operation and maintenance cost. But I'll briefly just cruise through that in the next slide, which is there. Okay, so this slide shows, this is for soils, S2 excavation, S3 excavation, and capping. So these are the soil alternatives across is the 5 balancing criteria. And then just to kind of compare the two, the excavation alternative, S2, would be more protective and it's going to be more permanent because it permanently removes the soils off-site versus, S3, which is, you remove one soil but you cap the other, so you are leaving contamination still in place that may leach out. None of the soil alternatives about treatment, so there's no reduction in toxicity, mobility, or volume through treatment. Short-term effectiveness, I know it's hard to see. The excavation, the S2, would take about 3 months to excavate the material and send it off-site from beginning to end. The capping would take about 9 months for S3 to excavate and to cap. The cleanup goals will be met. For S2, as soon as we do confirmatory sampling of the excavation, we'll make sure that it meets our cleanup goals, and then we backfill. So that'll be met pretty much right away if we got all the contamination. Okay. The implementability, both of them have problems with implementing it. It's going to be a little difficult to implement because the contamination behind the loading dock is really close to the Hobart building. So when we do the excavation, we want to make sure we don't undermine the structure and things like that. So, they're both moderately difficult to implement. But the excavation alternative is easier to implement because you're just digging up and hauling off versus the cap, you have to construct the cap, and you have to do other things with the cap. But cost. The cost of the excavation is less. S3 would be the excavation and capping. The capping would be more cost because you have to design the cap, you have to monitor the cap in the long term to make sure there's no cracks or potholes. If they are, you have to repair it. And then also too with the capped areas, we require institutional controls, which are like deed restrictions to prevent anybody from digging into that cap. Okay. Residential plume source theory, source area 3 treatment, the 5 balancing criteria, and alternative 2A and 2B, ISCAR, ERD and ISCAR both may generate methane during the treatment process, but that methane can be controlled through use of inhibitors. They also, both of them, have the potential to generate dechlorination byproducts. That means, once you're treating the PCE will convert to trichloroethylene, to cis-1,2-dichloroethylene, and then to vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride is much more toxic than PCE, perchloroethylene. So you got to monitor and watch that it doesn't happen. But those first two have the potential to generate vinyl chloride. ISCO doesn't. So we're saying this one is a little more protective because we don't have to deal with the daughter products. But it does have a potential to mobilize, to solubilize chromium that's currently in the groundwater, to make it soluble and then turn it into chromium-6, which is toxic. But we expect that once it leaves the treatment zone, it's going to return back to its non-toxic form, essentially. But we're going to be monitoring the treatment, whatever we choose, make sure that there's no daughter products or we're not generating anything that's really bad. All of them about treatment, so they're all reduced to toxicity, mobility, and volume. Short-term effectiveness, it would take 1 year to construct pretty much all the remedies, all of these treatment options. There wouldn't be any risks really to the community because all the treatment is occurring underground. Okay, the the cleanup goals for the first one, we're expecting it would take less than 15 years to reach that 70 to 90% reduction in that mass at the source area. With ISCAR, it's 10 years, and with the last one, ISCO, it's also 10 years. This technology, all of them have been used at different sites. With ISCO, and you'll see a big increase, a drop in the contaminants right away. But then you have these things called rebound effects, whatever. But it's, we don't expect it to take 10 years. We definitely think it's going to be much less than 10 years. Okay, so the first two, as far as implementability, the first two require recirculation, so it's a little more difficult to implement than the last one, which is just injection in the ground. As far as costs, the ISCAR, the two, that's the highest in cost, and ISCO is the least as far as the cost-wise. But we also, we haven't tested for this natural oxidant demand, NOD, and that we will be testing for it. But if this NOD is higher than we think it is, that we anticipate it is, then the cost of the remedy may increase. Okay, and then I didn't go through the criteria analysis for the vapor intrusion because we're not required to under Superfund law because we're just considering one treatment. Okay, this is almost the end. Preferred alternative. This is what we're recommending, and we want to get your comments on. For the East Water Street soils, we're recommending alternative 2C to excavate it, send it off-site, backfill, clean material. The cost of that would be $2.3 million. The construction time to do that from beginning to end would be 3 months. And then we'll meet the cleanup goals once we do the post excavation sampling to make sure they meet the cleanup goals. For groundwater, For groundwater, we're recommending alternative 2C, which is the ISCO, primarily because you don't have the recirculation. It's just injection in the ground. You don't have to manage the contaminated water from that zone 1A. So it's just less complicated, and it's equally as effective. The cost for that is $12 million. Take about a year to construct, and as I said, for the cleanup goals, less than 10 years. Vapor intrusion, we're going to be offering, or we'd like to offer people between Union and Frank and Main and Canal subslab depressurization system. And again, that's to minimize or eliminate the potential for any vapor intrusion occurring. And especially because also, there's going to be an area where their treatment area, there's homes above it. And so we just want to make sure that, nothing is kind of getting into the homes, especially since we're treating underground. So that was one of the main reasons there. And this just summarizes everything I just said as far as cleanup alternatives. And total cost of this entire remedy would be $20 million. Yeah. And the next steps, as Adrian said, the public comment period opened the 25th of June, and it ends the 25th of July. What we'll do then is that once we get all your comments, I'll take them back to the office, review all of them, and then I'll respond to them in writing. We then, based on the public comments, we consult with the state, and then we select a final cleanup remedy for the site, and then we formalize or document that remedy decision in a document called the Record of Decision, the ROD. And all this is, well, the ROD's not available yet. It will be available after we do this process here. But everything is, there's a lot of documents in the local repository, your Troy Public Library, the RI, the FS, and all the other documents that we use to make a decision to where we are right now. So all of that is available for you.
It's also available on the website, so the EPCA East Troy with the mirror of the website, so if you go there, you'll be able to find those documents.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. And thank you, everybody, for very interesting as well. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But we wanted to make sure we show you all the details about it so you can have a good idea of what just have all the information behind it. With that, we're going to move to our brief question and answers section. And then we're going to, which this is not going to be recorded, the question and answers just to clarify questions you may have from the presentation. And then we're going to go to the public comment section, which is the most important thing for tonight, which is you providing any comments you may have regarding the proposed cleanup. Now, like Sherry was mentioning, this is not the only opportunity you have for public comments. You can mail in, you can email them to us, you can go to the website and fill your comments. You have until July 25th to provide your comments. So with that being said, like I said, we're not recording the question and answer session. We will transcribe the public comment section. We have our stenographer here who will be transcribing all the public comments that we may receive tonight, just to add it to the responsiveness summary that we will provide. So with that, I know some of you, or most of you, I've collected some question cards and also some public comments cards. The purpose of that behind was you want to make kind of in an orderly fashion and not everybody just comes in at once. So we'll go through the numbers of the questions. If at the end somebody may have a question and maybe didn't get a card, we can still accommodate that. But we just want to follow the order to make it in an orderly fashion. So I hope you guys heard most of it. But basically, we're moving to the question and answer session, and we will follow the questions numbers, the order that you have. And if we still, somebody has some last questions you may have at the end, we should be able to accommodate that as well. So with that, if anybody has a question number 1 that they'd like to provide, and you also, just so you know, if for some reason you change your mind and you don't want to provide a question and you have a card, that's perfectly fine. We'll just move to the next question as well. So question number 1, we have one over here. Would you like the microphone, or are you okay?
Whoever's speaking is going to need that mic to hear.
Yeah, it will be better if you
sure.
can, if you don't mind.
Or you can repeat it.
Well, I'll try my best if I can hear it.
Okay.
If you do get contaminated with it and have a health risk, what would be the health risk?
Okay, so the question was, if you are exposed to some contamination, what would be potentially the health risk? Also,
Yeah, okay, so when there's no cancer risks associated with this PCE and TCE, the risks are primarily to your central nervous system. There's kidney and liver damage that could occur. And I'm going to defer the rest of this to Eric Morton, who's a risk assessor. He'll be able to tell you a little bit more. Do you mind?
Yeah, I would,
Eric, would you like the microphone?
yes.
I would say Sherry summarized it pretty well. The non-carcinogenic effects, there's central nervous system depression, kind of like a central nervous depression if you get a lot of exposure to it. That'd be the non-carcinogenic effect. Potentially also some impacts to liver and kidney. I'd have to correct Sherry. They're both considered potential carcinogens. What she was saying is that the levels that we're seeing now are not above the outside of EPA's target risk range, except if you were to use just the water like a potable water source every day, all the time, and that's not currently happening. Nor is it anticipated, but we're required to look at that as to if somebody in the future would stick to a well and use it as a source, you would have a problem. Currently, that's not occurring. We don't expect it to occur. But those are the health effects you would see. And again, you got to keep in mind that the numbers that we run through that she was giving you are based on long-term exposure. Basically 26 years of exposure. It's a lot of exposure. So it's not an imminent problem, but there are also health effects. If you get regular exposure to something, it's not a good thing. So that's why we're making the effort to clean it up, because it does have a little bit of risk. So.
Thank you, Eric. We have a question number 2.
My question concerns Forest Elementary School, which is located in the residential area that you were talking about. I wanted to confirm that the water is safe at the school and that the vapor intrusion level is at acceptable levels right now. I don't know if there's cracks or holes in the foundation or not.
Okay. Yeah, the water is safe. Everyone is getting their drinking water from the city's municipal water supply. That water's safe. A lot of the risks I'm talking about is if you drink the contaminated groundwater, as is. So the water's safe. As far as vapor intrusion, I believe when our EPA removal folks came here in 2007, they tested all of the schools in the area as well as homes. And they didn't find anything that was above like an action level that would require a vapor abatement system.
Yeah, the
Only school,
the
St.
only
Patrick's
school
School.
was St. Patrick's.
Yeah, right. That was above the levels.
Okay,
Right.
that was 2007,
That was 2007.
and it hasn't been tested since?
Did we test? We didn't test in the RI? No. No, but I do want to point out, though, those levels back in 2007, the levels are different today. So a lot of the homes that got the vapor intrusion systems, vapor mitigation systems, under today's standards, wouldn't need to have one. Would not need to have one. And we did a comparison to make sure that was true, yeah.
I believe question number 3. Does anybody have question number 3? Right here.
Yeah, the only question I have is in the vapor intrusion testing that was done in the residential area, did you find a difference between homes that had basements and homes that did not, if you tested both?
We did not find any. We didn't find any unacceptable health risks. You know, everything was below this, was within an acceptable range. We didn't find anything that would cause a health risk, whether they had subslab vapor. Well, are you talking about the subslab underneath, like people's homes, or are you talking about the indoor air that people are breathing? The indoor air. Yeah.
Basement versus non-basement home.
Yeah, we really didn't, it's not like we found, 100 times in the subslab and 10 in the indoor. We didn't find anything that would cause a health problem.
There was no indication of any difference or anything like that.
No, not that I can recall, but I can look into it if you like.
So when I was running Bob's Pride with the Ohio Department of Health, and I was here in 2007 and 2008 when we did the initial removal action. And what we found on some of the houses along water in particular is the ones that had basements actually had higher levels in subslab than the ones that had crawl spaces. So it looks like, which seems kind of counterintuitive because the house is sitting right on the dirt where the contamination is. But most of those houses with the crawl space have a flow-through air, and so it would dilute out the vapor phase stuff before it got into the indoor air in the house. So, again, it's kind of counterintuitive, but even the ones that have the concrete basements that have the higher indoor air.
And that was for sub-slab, correct? Not for indoor air. Okay. Question number 4. You had number 3 or number 4, sir?
Number 3.
Number 3, so number 4. Does anybody have question number 4? Okay. Nope. Okay. Question number 5.
Where does the funding come from to take care of this?
Okay, well, I guess the good news is it's listed as a Superfund site. That means it's eligible for federal funds to clean up the site. But what we typically do when we have a site like this, or any Superfund site, we look for those people who may be responsible for the contamination. So like we did this already, we tried to search for everybody who may have contaminated groundwater. Dry cleaner, couldn't find anybody, and if they're probably not alive, if they were, the owner was so long ago. And Hobart is still around. And Spinnaker's still around. But we typically look for, people who cause the contamination, and those are really the 3 main parties. But we also do an assessment, can they afford to clean up? Are they bankrupt? I mean, if they're bankrupt, we can't get money out of them. So we're going to use the federal dollars to clean up the site.
So we're doing a detailed investigation to see who may be a potential responsible party. But right now, currently, like Sherry was mentioning, is listed as in the national priorities list, so it's listed as a Superfund site. So the funds are coming from the federal government at this point. We're still doing an investigation. We've done it for a while. We will continue in that manner, but as of right now, it's coming from federal funds. Question number 5. Oh, number 6. Okay. Also, how many questions did we get?
16.
16. Okay, thank you. So question number is nobody has number 6.
I have 7.
Okay. Question number 7.
Yeah,
Oh, she's okay. Okay, right. And question number 8.
I have a couple questions. I'll make up for those that didn't ask.
Sure.
Okay. This is maybe simple. Can we have access to a copy of the PowerPoint for someone who wasn't able to come tonight? Because this has a lot more information than what we got in the mail.
Yeah,
It's
oh,
much more
absolutely.
useful.
Yeah, you can have a copy of that. We'll post it on our website. We'll provide copies. Tom, do you want to talk about what you plan to do as far as,
Well, the presentation tonight is being aired is streamed on our website as well, and across our YouTube site, and it will be posted on our website then as well. Some of this is a little challenging to see possibly, so I think
yeah,
when it comes to the PowerPoint, it might be easier to get it directly from the US EPA website.
yeah, and you just, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And how long will the households or businesses be monitored after the mitigation period, or, when they're being mitigated? I mean, I see like there's these plans for, it takes this long for something to be resolved, but, we don't know what the long-term effects really, you have more information and knowledge in that area, but if my home is impacted and there's a mitigation process of, how long will I know that I should feel safe or unsafe?
Well, there will be periodic testing. We'll be paying when putting in the systems, and we'll make sure that, the indoor air levels are what they're supposed to be, that they're safe. And then Ohio EPA will take up the second part as far as monitoring. I don't know if it's, annual testing, if it's semi-annual, I'm not sure, but they'll, continue to test the vapor mitigation system to make sure that they're working properly. And this will continue throughout the lifespan until the groundwater's cleaned out.
Okay. And we just recently purchased a home in this area. So the assumption is that it was in the 2007 testing. How can I find out what the results were during that time period on our home?
Yeah, we do.
So normally we only provide results to the owner, so we would have to look into that. What we can do is, since you weren't the current owner at the time, you're the current owner now, we'll have to look into just the
Adrian,
legal aspect of it.
microphone. Oh, sorry.
So what I was saying is, normally we only provide results to the owner of the residence for privacy considerations. Now, since you were not the owner back in 2007, and if you're the owner now, we were just looking to, what is probably just contact us, let us know, and we'll go through our legal team to make sure that we are providing the right information to the right people. So that's probably how I would recommend you to do. I couldn't give you like a cut down answer at this point, but please contact us and we'll look into that. So question number 9, I believe, number 9.
With the depressurization systems, and most of these homes are older homes, like 1800s, early 1900s. The basements are partials. You can see the dirt, but the floor joists are on the dirt. What's the risk with this treatment and maybe more VOCs coming up that you can't even control?
Yeah, I think for the dirt floor basements or
They're partials.
partial.
Wood burning or whatever. whatever.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to put just like a sub-slab system because you have no foundation or a partial foundation. I mean, we would look at other ways as well, like a liner or a barrier that we put down over the soil to prevent the VOCs from migrating up. Also, I believe, I'm not sure exactly how all this works, but whatever we do put in, it's going to be protective and just as protective as the vapor mitigation systems. And I want to say, and maybe you can jump in, Maddie, but I thought that we can do both. You can do like, a membrane, putting a protective barrier down and put a system in.
Yeah, we had talked about some different options. I think we even had talked about if we encountered a dirt floor basement, putting an actual slab down, so putting concrete over it. What you really want to have is this impermeable barrier, like a concrete, that doesn't have any cracks in it. Because with the dirt, you have no barrier. So whatever's under there is, potentially going to come up. But if you have a nice slab of concrete that's impermeable, then yeah, you can get vapors cooling under it, but they can't get through. So that's why sometimes you might see a basement with a good slab has a higher concentration under it, but nothing in the indoor air. It's just, you gotta make sure that you're filling in those cracks.
The home that I live in, it was built in 1878, the first part of it, and then another part was built. And you can look over and you can see the dirt and the floor joists, but there's no way you can get to it. So I was, yeah, there's not even considered a crawl space. You couldn't even crawl in it. So I was just wondering about that, and I was wondering about, is there any risk with injection wells? You hear about this fracking causing earth to shift. Is there any risk to that?
Risk of earthquakes or risk of?
Just the ground shifting?
Oh, shifting and stuff? Not that I'm aware of. I mean,
Okay.
this, technology has been used throughout.
So you guys have done this before and had
Oh,
good
yeah,
results?
yeah, it's been, well, I haven't, but yes, EPA has done it at a lot of other sites, and it's been effective.
Okay. Thank you.
And also regarding your question, so there will be some testing done before, of course, if you give us permission to do it and you're in the area, and then after whatever method we use, there will be some post-testing done. So that would be, we're not sure exactly at this point, depending on the circumstances and the construction of your home, but there would be a follow-up testing to make sure that the levels have been mitigated, of course, before we would move on. So. Okay, so question number 10, I believe.
I've got two questions. The first is, there are some homes in this affected area where homeowners have dug wells and they're using them to water their lawn or whatever. Is there any risk to them or the local residents in that situation?
Yeah, we did look at that pathway, actually, in our risk assessment, because we knew that some people have these wells that they're using for irrigation or watering their lawns or, their garden or whatever, but the risk assessment showed there was no health risk associated with doing that. So it's fine.
Second question is, in terms of the soil excavation, when they do that excavation, how are the workers that are doing that and the local residents protected? You said this could be months worth of work where that area is open,
Right.
There's rain washing the area and so on. So how does that, how's that impacted?
The workers would be protective using personal protective equipment. So I don't know, whether respirators, I don't think, the concentrations are not that high. They would have to use that, but they would be protected through their work outfits. The community could be exposed during excavation when they start digging and then, dust and all the vapors start coming up. They could be exposed that way. And so what we need to do to protect the community is to put a dust suppressant, and that's mainly probably water. Every time they're excavating, just spray it with water to make sure that there's no dust being blown up in the air. Yeah.
The timeframes that are listed for that excavation to occur.
Sure. Hold on a second. Hey, Guy, hold on.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to add that the timeframes that were expressed for the excavation scenarios, Those include also the lead time, the planning, the design for that and everything too. So that's not 9 months of excavation time. It's probably going to be much, much shorter than that. You guys have seen, you know, construction go on sites. It doesn't take 9 months to dig up 1,000 yards of soil. So it's, and also just the, with regard to the risks, also just point out that the risks in the risk assessment are kind of a long-term exposure scenario, correct, Eric? Whereas this, you know, construction scenario is a much shorter duration. So,
Question number 11.
Currently, there's no risk to the city of Detroit groundwater, but I would like to hear a little bit more about what the oversight will be during the treatment process as far as like monitoring and detecting any off-site migration of contaminants down gradient in the near aquifer, especially towards the East Wellfield area.
Yeah, and that's something we're definitely monitoring as part of this remedy, whichever one we choose. And the idea is we're going to start in the area that's closest to the church and then like a 2-block area. So we'll treat the 2-block area first. We'll be monitoring the groundwater throughout this whole process, a lot of wells, to monitor the groundwater, make sure we're not producing those daughter products, they're not moving off sites, and that we're protecting the well field. So we're going from, you know, from the beginning part here, trying to learn lessons, you know, to help improve us when we start treating down gradient to Union Street. But yeah, there'll be lots of monitoring going on, make sure, because that's, obviously we don't want to do that. We don't want to expose the well field either.
Thank you. Question number 12, I believe. Number 12? No? Okay, number 12, 13?
Talking about injecting other chemicals into the residential site, and those chemicals breaking down into other compounds, can they become airborne also?
No, this is all done, this is all underground, this occurs.
I'm talking about under.
Oh, the vapor?
The vapors come up that can be more hazardous than the current.
Oh, yeah, well, that's why we're going to be offering the sub-slab depressurization systems. But again, you know, like if you have a foundation that has no cracks, I mean, there's not going to be any way for those vapors to get into your home, you know. But if...
And they'll be monitoring, and they'll also be monitoring throughout the entire process,
Yeah,
correct?
right, we'll be monitoring the process as well, but...
I think it's important to point out that the preferred
Hey,
alternative.
can you take the microphone so they can hear? Thanks.
The preferred alternative that Sherry listed, the in situ chemical oxidation, is the one that does not generate
Right.
the daughter products, they call them, that are more toxic, specifically like the vinyl chloride she expressed. The way the chemical reaction works with ISCO, it knocks it down to pretty harmless, innocuous compounds directly, whereas the other reactions are kind of more of a stepwise reaction. And that's not to say that they would necessarily generate those products, but they have a potential to, whereas ISCO does not. So.
Right, and that's why we're recommending that one.
Question number 13.
Perchloroethylene is used mainly for dry cleaning and some of the cleaning products on metal. But in addition to that, it's also used as an electronics cleaner for contacts. What have you done to double check that the phone company, which is right at the head of this major pollution stream, has not created this material?
Yeah. We did extensive groundwater sampling, and we'll show you, we have some maps that we have with us, and I could show you, you know, at the end of the meeting, and I'll show you the areas that we sampled and where you're talking about, and, you know, in relation to where we sampled. The area you're talking about, there's no evidence that there's any contamination, PCE, coming from that area.
Thank you, sir. Question number 14.
What is your sequence as far as timeline of doing the sub-slab depressurization system? Do
Are you going to start that as soon as possible before doing the other things? Are they all going to happen at the same time? And when you do those things, like you said, it was going to take 6 days. You know, there's basements with furnaces, water heaters. Do you have to leave the house, or will it disrupt the house or building for a period of time, or those questions?
Yeah, well, we want to put in the systems first before we treat. First of all, you don't have to leave the house, but we do come in and do like an inspection before we put in the systems, make sure that, you know, we remove any other chemicals, like, I don't know, nail polish remover, paint remover, or things like that from the basement. So that, yeah. Guy, do you want to, you actually did some sub-slab vapor sampling and indoor here in this area, so you can probably answer them a little better.
You're speaking specifically with, the question was with regard to sampling or installing the system?
Installing the system. How long and how disruptive is it?
It's not, it's going to vary a little bit, you know, house by house depending on the construction. And I'm not a specialist in installing these systems, but I believe the duration of installing one of these is typically a day or two at the most. They can be installed fairly quickly. If you have to get into situations where you're adding a barrier or pouring a slab or something, that obviously involves a little more time. But if it's a straightforward installation of a system where they're just, you know, pulling the vapors from below an existing slab, it's done fairly quickly. And I think probably the best response would be maybe you have some information from some other sites where you could provide a response to that. There's some sites in the Dayton area where there's a lot of systems that have gone in recently, so.
Right.
Might.
Right, and it's not only just installing, we have to go in before then and do the inspection and remove all those chemicals.
Sure.
So that's intrusive to you, installing the system, and then we have to come back after we install the system, which is another intrusion for you. We'd have to go in your house and sample the air. So I think, you know, all of those collectively, it turns out to be 6 days or less.
The actual sampling, if you get a system
the actual sampling, and I don't know if anybody out here has had their house sampled, it's not that intrusive. They're just little air canisters. They don't make any sound. They'll sit there for 24 hours, so someone will drop them off and then come pick them up within 24 hours. If you have your sub-slab sampled, that's a little bit more intrusive. We actually have to drill a little hole through the slab and then insert a little pin, and then we collect the sample, typically over 24 hours.
And all the cost is covered under the.
Yes, yep.
I think last time question was 14, correct? I believe so, yes, okay. So question number 15. Okay, question number 16. Okay, I think we had 16, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna give an opportunity to see if somebody asks a last question they'd like to ask, even though they may not have a card. Then we'll move forward to the public comment section, which actually is the most important part of this meeting. Thank you for being with us throughout this entire time. Would anybody like to make a last question?
I work in like the really weird, or I live on East Main in the weird spot that's like, shows that it's okay. Like, it's bad on both sides. And they did come and sample my house, so they've already, is that like I'm already done, or is there something additional that they'll have to come and put in? Because they did drill into the floor of my basement. Yeah.
I'll have to see where you are in relation to the map that we're, you know, we have a map outline of where we're planning on offering it. So
Okay.
If, I'm sorry? Oh, Main and Union? Main and Union? Oh, yeah, then. Yeah, definitely. We would offer you one.
Okay.
You know, I mean, as far as sampling, I mean, we could sample as well, but in the end, sampling is going to be more expensive than putting a system in. So that's it.
So yeah, we're offering in that area that we were mentioning about. If you're really close to that area, just let us know and we'll evaluate. But really what we're offering is in that area right now.
Okay. Adrian, can I point out something? Are
yes,
we
yes,
starting
of
the
course.
public formal hearing with the comments?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay, are you doing
Oh,
that?
we haven't started the public comments hearing section yet, but we're going to in a minute, yeah.
Okay, just so that they know, because Any
there's nothing's being recorded right now until the public comments portion starts, which will start very shortly if we don't have any more questions.
Yeah.
One more question, well, maybe two more questions, and then we'll move forward to the public comment section.
My question is simple, just you mentioned about public comment and then the time to get there. What is your estimate of timing where you get to the record of decision and have the final document that here's the plan moving forward?
September, the end of September this year, we'll have the record of decision.
Okay, I think there was one last question maybe back there.
I just wondered, we purchased a house on Water Street, on Water a while ago, and back in 2007, and it was mitigated. Do you go back and check those homes after all this had been taken care of, all the plume and everything? Do you go back and check those homes? I'm just curious, because now we bought a house on Walnut and we're back again, ta-da, with the same issue. And I also work for Spinnaker. So I have 3 issues. I'm also concerned about the people that are, all the citizens that are behind, that come behind the Hobart, and they're, using the river every day. And they're playing in the water and stuff. Is there a sign there that is going to be cleaned up? These are all issues that should be, discussed. Thank you.
Those are important comments. Do we want to get that on the public record so that we can respond to them in writing and everyone can see? I mean,
Our family would go down and watch the 4th of July every year. The whole area is full where you pointed out on the screen.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the soil area, nobody should be playing in those areas, in the soil behind the loading dock.
When we go there and watch, everybody's on blankets and everything, we watch fireworks.
Oh.
I work across the street, and there are people there every day. It's gonna be next
Yeah.
week.
Okay, right. The contamination there at Hobart, though, it starts like at 4 feet. That's where the bulk of the contamination is, where you see the high levels. We didn't find anything in surface soils. So for now, I guess it's,
Yeah, the surface soils were sampled, especially behind Spinnaker as well, and for direct contact.
For direct contact, it's safe. What we're looking at behind Hobart specifically is they have very high concentrations a couple feet down that, you're not, unless you're digging in that, you're not going to be exposed to it. The issue there is that it's leaching into the groundwater. We did do sampling of the sediment and the surface water at the Great Miami River, and they were not impacted. So that has been sampled. And then also, if your house that you bought on Walnut Street is within that purple area, then you will be offered a system. And the systems, once they're in, Ohio EPA will take over that monitoring. And I don't know if it'll be every year or every other year, but we will be coming in periodically to sample your indoor air to make sure that your system's still running. So you will be sampled, and that'll be for the duration until we have the groundwater levels cleaned up to a level that's not going to cause vapor intrusion problems.
Well, we have a house that is, half basement, half ground, we have a very, very old house. I understand.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. Now we're moving to the public comment section, which will be recorded by our stenographer. So basically, I think most of you, when you came in, might have picked up a card, a green color card, which says public comment. So we'll try to go in that order as well to kind of keep an order fashion for the public comments. You are free to say whatever comment you have. We will not provide any answers to those comments. They are your comments. They will be recorded. They will be added to the responsiveness summary document, so they will not be addressed at this point. You're just able to provide the comments. Once again, you don't have to do it tonight. You can fill it up on those fact sheets that you have and those papers, and you can give it to me or give it to Meg Musa over there, and we'll keep it for you. and we'll add them to the responsiveness summary. You can also email them to us. You can go to the website and provide your comments. So with that, I would like to just start the public comment period, which is the most important thing about tonight, in addition to keep you all informed about what's going on. So with that, does anybody have public comment number 1? And if you would like, you have 2 options. You can come and give your public comment here, or I can give you the microphone, whatever you prefer.
Make sure that it's not working here.
Yeah, just also, if you're giving a public comment, please state your name and also just spell it so it can be properly recorded for the public comment and for the responsiveness summary. Thank you very much.
My name is Julia Carnum, Karnehm. I've lived in my house for 23 years. I've had 9 dogs in the past. All of them have only lived to the age of 8. The last one, I had an autopsy done, and she died of kidney failure. And I have 2 more right now. The one is 8. So we'll see on that.
Public comment number 2, anybody? And we can, if you decide you don't want to do it or not, that's perfectly fine. We just move to the next public comment card. Nope, okay. Public comment number 3. How many public comment cards did we get, Meg? 16 as well, okay. Number 3. Public comment number 4. Okay, number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 8.
My name is Terry Parmenter, Parmenter. I just want to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear what you have to share with us this evening, but I also want to request that information is provided more as we go forward, because I love the city of Troy. I love living here, but there's a gap in information being shared in what goes on in our community. And this is so important. I expected a lot more people here this evening because this is so important. And I know you're here, Mr. Mayor, so yes, and you're hearing me very well, that there just needs to be a broadcast of what's going on. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but thank you for sharing what you have. And I don't know what else to do or say, but I just feel like this needs to be shared more broadly, so those people who aren't here this evening are going to be able to get this information.
Thank you. Now, you were number 8, correct? Number 8. Public comment number 9. Number 10.
My name is James Fitzpatrick, Fitzpatrick. My only comment would be, out of the options you've presented, I agree with the selection.
Comment number 11. Comment number 12. Comment 13. 14.
My name is David Enneking, Enneking. Again, I want to thank you for what you're doing to help clean this up, but I'm also questioning, when you do take materials and move them to another site, landfills, how are you making these selections so that you're just not moving a problem to a problem?
Thank you. Comment number 15. And then we cannot address any comments at this point. Comment number 16. I believe that was all the comment cards we had. But if you have one last comment you'd like to give, I'm more than happy to share with you the microphone.
Rosemary Jones, Jones. I was raised on East Main Street, 428, which is right next to Waltz's Cleaners. My concern, though, is there's so much talk about redeveloping riverfront. What would happen if Spinnaker, which was also Brown Bridge, my father worked there, and he would not eat any fish out of that river because of chemicals that they use. So what happens if someone decides to take from Hobart down to the end of Spinnaker and redevelop that? What will they have to do in order to excavate and rebuild? And is that even a possibility? And what would be their parameters with that? And again, thank you for sharing all this.
Thank you. Okay, any last comment anybody would like to say before we end the meeting? Okay, well, don't see any more, so I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for asking questions, and thank you for providing your comments. And once again, they will be part of our responsiveness summary. They will all be there, and they will be taken into account in deciding which cleanup option ultimately EPA will follow. So once again, I want to thank the City of Troy for allowing us to use this wonderful facility here. Very comfortable. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'd just like to say good night, and thank you for being here tonight.